We're very, very honoured to have our next speaker here with us this evening. He's a Conservative MP who started out in international law before joining the diplomatic service, where, amongst other things, he headed up a new team focused on bringing war criminals such as Slobodan Milosevic to justice. He's been Chief of Staff to the Shadow Home and Justice Secretaries, advising on crime, policing, immigration, counter-terrorism, human rights and constitutional reform. In 2011, he was voted Newcomer of the Year at the Spectator's Parliamentary of the Year Awards. And he's led a range of national campaigns promoting free enterprise, liberty and human rights reform, as well as authoring books on those topics as well. Following the Conservative success at the last general election, he was made Justice Minister in David Cameron's government. He also happens to be a black belt in karate and still trains at his local boxing club, so patently not a politician to be messed with. So I'm going to stand well clear and welcome Dominic Raab MP. Please stand.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction. It's a great pleasure to join this fabulous celebration this evening. This is actually the first time I've been let out alone since coming off the backbencher's naughty step and joining the government. And I've got a 2-year-old son at home, and he's been spending a bit of time on the naughty step himself, and whenever he comes off, we insist he apologises to everyone he may have wronged and give them a little kiss on the cheek. And I'm just relieved the Prime Minister doesn't apply the same rules when he forms a government. But it's a huge honour to join the tributes to the IEA tonight for this celebration of your 60th anniversary. And as many have already said, the establishment of the IEA was genuinely a historic landmark. As Margaret Thatcher said of the path to economic freedom, it started with ideas and beliefs. And as has already been cited, she said of the IEA's founders, they were the few, but they were right, and they saved Britain. It wasn't just some ivory tower exercise that you get with some think tanks. The IEA inspired trade union reforms to get the economy off its knees, promoted tax cuts to give entrepreneurs a reason to take risks, and pioneered deregulation to strap rocket boosters onto Britain's languishing productivity. And for the first time, your ideas gave the little guy a real stake in our country, buying shares, owning a home, and in so many other ways that, frankly, we take for granted today. Fancy a holiday in Provence, liberalising the aviation market, slashed the price of a flight to Nice by something like 83%. All of a sudden, that kind of holiday became affordable for normal families, not just the hoi polloi. Want to stay in touch with that cousin in Australia? Breaking up BT's monopoly led to cuts of 90% on phone calls abroad. Your ideas make capitalism work for consumers, not just for corporations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to say something about my own personal experience of the IEA, what the IEA means to me. And it took me back about 8 years ago to a beach in Brazil where my wife comes from. And I'd had a couple of drinks, a couple of caipirinhas, and I went into the sea to clear my head and mull over a very crude idea I had for a book. And it was a very simple idea that New Labour and the left had eroded Britain's tradition of liberty in this country. ID cards, proposals for 90 days detention without charge. But at the same time, it fueled this rights culture, this rights inflation, which frankly, when you looked at it, had precious little to do with freedom, certainly in the IEA sense. And as I came out the sea, this idea crystallised in my mind for the first time. But I was totally lost because the tide had dragged me down the beach by about 600 yards. And I remember walking back up that beach with this clear idea in my head, but physically totally disoriented, trying to locate my family amidst scantily clad Brazilians. It was terrible. Now, there is some relevance to this, and I'll come back to why it sticks in my mind. Glad my wife's not here. But it was the IEA that nurtured that idea for a book. It was Peter Oborne, after an IEA seminar, who took me to one side and, very typically of him, introduced me to his agent. It was John Blundell, fantastic man, who insisted I hold the book launch at the IEA, and he packed the place with opinion formers. Some wrote a few reviews, one or two were even positive. And I have to say, it meant a lot to me. And now in government, we've a chance to deliver a British Bill of Rights based on that raw idea the IEA helped to cultivate. Mine's a small contribution, but I feel a huge debt to all of you. And likewise, in my first term as an MP, I was very proud to be active in the Free Enterprise group of MPs, which the IEA also supports very actively. And 5 of us teamed up to write a book called Britannia Unchained. I think Kwasi, who was our ringleader, is somewhere lurking out there as well. And our basic gist was we wanted to take on this ludicrous, debilitating, anti-austerity, anti-capitalist narrative put about by the egalitarian left in this country. And again, it was the IEA that supported us in waging the war of ideas and launching that book. Now, as authors, we pledged collective responsibility for the whole book. You could tell we were politicians. But the chapter I wrote said that we've really got to do more to incentivize hard work. We talked a bit about the ways we'd do that. Now, the week of the IEA launch, this led to a hysterical front-page splash in a tabloid newspaper headlined, "Tories Attack Lazy Britain." Craig Woodhurst here may know where that came from. Now, despite collective responsibility, journalists very quickly worked out that I was responsible for this national slander. And I think it was Michael Savage in the Times who coined the Dominic Raab defence, which was generously put up by my co-authors whenever they got questioned on anything in the book that was remotely controversial. I'm sure collective responsibility in government won't be a bit like that. Now, maybe I was naive. We certainly got a fair amount of stick for talking about hard work. But within a year, I think every major party was talking about it in their straplines and their sound bites. And taking on issues like that helped us do something about welfare reform, helped us to provide the intellectual climate for talking about and doing something about marginal rates of taxation. And it was the IEA that gave us a voice. In fact, I think Mark and Ryan's only complaint was that for all our praise of hard-working people, we risked neglecting the unsung virtues of the talented idler. Not quite sure who Mark had in mind, I'm sure. Ladies and gentlemen, the IEA is stronger than ever, and it will need to be, because the anti-business forces on the left will regroup, notwithstanding Miliband's loss. The fight for economic freedom is not yet won, whether it's the struggle for transatlantic free trade or driving competition in gummed-up markets to give consumers real clout. And I think what Keith Joseph said at the IEA's 20th anniversary is especially true and remains true today. If the IEA didn't exist, we would desperately need to reinvent it so that we can make our case that only free enterprise can generate the prosperity in a globalized century. Only free enterprise can help the poorest out of poverty, and only the free enterprise can help give the little guy a real stake in our economy. And both in that tectonic struggle and in its support for those of us trying to breathe life into ideas, the IEA's strength will be like the warm, irresistible tide on that Brazilian beach, gently, powerfully, sometimes without us even knowing it, shifting the debate to a whole new place. Happy birthday, and thank you.